For 20 years, we've been creating innovation in the CX industry, and now we're seeking out brilliant new perspectives on CX you just won't find anywhere else. I'm Richard Owen. Welcome to the CX Iconoclast. Jean-Christophe Barland certainly fits the definition of a CX iconoclast. When I first met him, he was general manager of Bristol Myers Squibb in France, bringing customer experience thinking into BMS in what I think is still completely original ways. As you may know, pharma has, shall we say it, a rather complicated relationship with its customers, starting with the fact that many in the industry have a pretty hard time figuring out who exactly the customer is. Physicians, patients, government payers. It's not simple at all, and set all this against a regulatory backdrop that makes interaction with any of these groups fairly complicated and indeed potentially risky. Later on, JC went on to run BMS in Tokyo, so you can imagine that we bonded over that experience. And then he took an executive position in New York City, focused on helping BMS rethink their entire go-to-market approach. Now he's struck out on his own, advising the pharma and biotech industries on both customer experience strategies and new approaches to how to go to market. I think we cover some pretty interesting ground here, especially when we talk about the impact of the pharmaceutical industry on an aging society and how he sees the world evolving to deal with these challenges that are going to affect us all and just about every nation. Beyond that biggest of pictures, you might say, pharma is really a pretty fascinating area for customer experience, and Jean-Christophe is perhaps the ultimate pharma CX iconoclast. I hope you enjoy our conversation. All right, Jean-Christophe Barland, welcome very much to the CX Iconoclast. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us here today.
Thanks, Richard. Glad to be with you.
So when Maurice was working on the question set here, he started with what he positions as a sort of fairly low-ball, easy question, but I suspect is a lot more difficult, which is talking about what exactly a customer is in the pharmaceutical industry. So maybe you could answer once and for all definitively, who is the customer for the pharmaceutical industry?
Yeah, no, I like the question. It's not such an easy one. Actually, it's a little bit like the gender of the angels, as we say. So there is an easy answer, and there is obviously a most complex one. Traditionally, the pharmaceutical industry sees the healthcare practitioners as their main customers. So in this most narrow definition, we are speaking about prescribers, but you can already expand this definition with other healthcare practitioners. So you can go into nurses, you can go into pharmacists, in a way, every single stakeholder in the healthcare systems. And beyond the healthcare practitioners themselves, of course, depending on the geographies, patients could have a direct, part in the decision-making process. And that's, of course,
well, clearly, there's been a huge investment in direct-to-consumer marketing, right? So the pharma companies wouldn't put all that money into that marketing if they didn't think the consumer had some input in it, right? I'm old enough to remember a time when you didn't see pharmaceutical commercials on television. And now in the United States, as you know, probably one of the biggest blocks of advertising is presenting consumers with, let's say, encouragement to go and seek advice around various elements. So consumer must matter in the minds of the pharmaceutical company.
They do. And it's obviously most extreme in the US. There is a regulation in many countries where actually direct advertising of products to consumer is not allowed outside the US. So, but definitively, patients and consumers need to be informed on disease awareness, diagnostic programs. So there are a lot of activities that are perfectly possible and actually welcome in the entire world.
And I suppose it gets more complicated because we typically think of the customer as somebody who makes the choice and somebody who pays the bill. And within pharma, who pays is of itself a complicated question because, in theory, the consumer at the end of it does pay, although in the United States, that runs through a complex set of relationships with employers and the government, and then the healthcare providers. In European systems, it probably is as varied as the different countries are and their different approach. So this notion of who ultimately pays the bill is not a simple question to answer, is it?
No, it's a very complex situation. And actually, to be complete to your answer to your questions about the customers, you are just introducing a very important stakeholder who is the payer. And the payer could be a patient, it could be an insurance company, it could be national healthcare systems. So there is a very large range of payers, and that's one of the complexity of our industry.
Yeah. So we've got complex definition of a customer, complex definition of a payer. And then just to set the stage, finally, we've got regulatory. And I was always struck. I mean, once I recall, we had met in one of Bristol Myers conference rooms in Paris, I think it was, and there were lawyers in the room. And I think it's unusual to have lawyers in a conversation about customer experience programs, but it's very commonplace because what you can do is highly controlled by the regulatory environment. So the regulators are another party in this relationship, aren't they?
Well, I would say regulators are a party in the relationship in the way that they define the framework of possible interface. And we should really consider them as co-architect of what we are doing. And that's probably why when we interface together, you could see my legal representatives and friends, because I've always been in the view that they should therefore be involved from the beginning of the projects to make sure that what we are constructing makes sense.
It just occurred to me,
and just 1 second, why I think it's important on this, because at the end of the day, we are also taxpayers, right? And so we are patient taxpayers, and for some of us, we are basically involved in the business of healthcare. And I think we need to make sure that whatever we are constructing is creating value for the patient and is making a good use of taxpayer money. So I'm not seeing the regulation and the legal framework as something negative. I think it's actually a good thing to ensure that we keep on this magnetic north.
I was going to say that I've been building this all up for a punchline, which is that we have customers, we have payers, we have regulators, we have a menage a trois, basically. I've been working up to that.
I hope you won't go into a French cliche there. I know it's called an iconoclast theory, but be careful.
I've been building for that. I'm not sure the punchline was worth the build-up. So if the complexity exists in this industry, how do we think about customer experience? I mean, I guess the big question is, does the pharmaceutical industry think of customer experience as an important variable, or is it simply too difficult to unpick in terms of all of these relationships to be something that creates important outcomes for the business?
So I think that, as in many situations, the glass here is half full, half empty. On the half full piece, I would say that yes, I mean, the pharmaceutical industry or life science industries are like other industries. They see some positive value in making sure that customer or stakeholder experience is as positive as possible. Now, the way it's articulated in the pharmaceutical industry is maybe because we are mainly left brain people. And we like technology. So there is a technological bias, and very often customer experience is perceived as, oh, is there any nice digital new ventures that we could go into that could make a difference? So it has some traction, but sometimes I think it's missing what could be really done, because at the end of the day, it's about changing behavior. And technology help, but this is not only about technology. You have to build the wheel, the understanding, and the awareness of why technology can be helpful. And you have to actually fundamentally agree on the type of behaviors you want to change.
So if we think about the practitioner or the prescribing physician as a simple way of thinking about the customer, how do we want their behavior to change? Or is this about changing the fundamental relationship between the provider of the product, the pharmaceutical company, and the prescribing physician? Am I right to think of that as being the sort of key axis for how we want to manage customer experience, and how do we change it?
I would say that is ultimately maybe the end point. We want, first of all, we need to, again, be mindful of doing customer experience for good. So at the end of the day, we want the right medicine to be prescribed on the right patients for the right reasons. And I'm going back to the ethical magnetic north that we touched upon. So that means sometimes, and often actually, when the work is well done, is to identify the patients who shouldn't be on a product. So that's a really important point. And how actually can we help when in the decision process to identify these right patients? And how then can we help on the management of these patients when the product is used? It's really important. And the pharmaceutical manufacturer or the biotech manufacturer is the best to actually position, to actually inform the customer about the best way to use the product, because of the wealth and breadth of data that we have on our own product.
And I think, and I have a very casual understanding of the pharmaceutical industry, but from what I remember from the companies I've been involved with, physicians at the end of the day are humans. They've got their own profiles. You've got a whole different classes of segment of physicians, ranging from those who are extremely current on products and technology, very scientific in their approach, to some that are perhaps a little more old-fashioned and are less aggressive at adopting technology. And then, of course, there's levels of competence. And we don't like to say it, but the reality is there's going to be a huge variance in competence amongst physicians. Some are going to be very good at their jobs, some are going to be very average, and some are going to be disappointing. And so getting to a great outcome for the patient, in some ways, it sounds to me like you're saying the more we can take out those variables from the physician equation and try and become more scientific and more data oriented in our approach to making sure the patient gets the right product, the right solution, the closer we're going to get to better clinical outcomes. But at the same time, the level of trust that people have with the pharmaceutical industry is going to get in the way of that. Nobody believes that there's no self-interest here. Mm-hmm. So it's I guess I'm stating the obvious here, but it's a complicated equation to get right.
It is an extremely complicated equation to get right. And we are starting on the physician side in this conversation, and you are right. There are different segments of physicians. At the end of the day, we want each segment, each customer experience within each segment to be as good as possible. That means we need to customize the approach for the different segments. But this beauty of mankind diversity is true also within the company, right? So it's the same difficulty that we bump into in terms of executing customer experience. Because at the end of the day, if the internal customer experience is poor, you stand absolutely no chance to have a good external customer experience, especially if you have to customize it. It means a lot of time and efforts. So I think we need to somehow connect insights on external customers, but also we need to have a very good insights on our own teams and to make the things work.
I know you've been a big advocate of getting the internal cultures right. And I think that's often a good place to start in a business where, as you say, there's a lot of complex outside perspectives. Tell us a little bit more about that, because I think you did some work when you were running BMS in Japan around looking at building internal culture. And, you know, that's tricky enough anywhere in the world. In Japan, it can be even trickier because the Japanese take their culture pretty seriously.
So I will give you an example of the application of a concept that has always fascinated me. Is what I call the IKEA effect. So the IKEA effect is a bit counterintuitive in a way. There is a lot of literature in customer experience which says that actually we need to create an effortless customer experience. And that's the way to go. And yet for nomads like me and a father of nomads, I had the privilege to spend a lot of time at IKEA to shop and then to build furnitures. And very often I found myself in a very interesting situation where I have this BD bookshelf that's probably it's marketed for $50 or whatever, 50 euros, that has traveled from the UK to Singapore to Japan, and I'm still wants to actually ship it because I spend a lot of time building this thing. I'm not a handy person. I even painted it to customize it. And here we touch something that is really, really important, and I will then move from IKEA to cellular therapy. So I was privileged to have the opportunity to lead the only number one hematology company in Japan, and the first one to launch not one but two cellular therapies. And cellular therapies nowadays, even if we try to scale up, if we need to, we're continuously working on the manufacturing, it's bloody hard. And just to give you a feel of what the miracle that is achieved is some patients who suffer from very difficult to treat hematological conditions. We basically take their blood, extract their T cells, their lymphocytes. We genetically modify the lymphocytes. We re-inject the lymphocytes, the genetically modified lymphocytes, to the patients. And these genetically lymphocytes have been trained to recognize the cancer cells. So in a way, it's a magic bullet. But this process is super complex and things have improved. But 5-6 years ago, for some part of the process, you probably had 200 people in the world who could do it. So you had to ship the blood from Japan or Europe to the US and then ship back the blood of the patients. If one mistake is made and that the sample of this personalized medicine is made, you might lose the sample. And if you lose the sample, very often this is the last chance for the patients. So the pressure on the people is unbelievable. So put this in a Japanese culture, you know it very well, Richard, where the expectation is flawless execution. This is the only country in the world where the trains are apologizing because they come 3 minutes ahead of the expected time. So the Shinkansen is actually saying, we're terribly sorry, we're gonna make it to Tokyo 5 minutes ahead of schedule. Terribly sorry for that. So you combine a culture like this with basically craftsmanship, high-level scientific craftsmanship, where, of course, things go wrong. It takes more time than anticipated. And so I was in a situation where I had a team that was feeling continuously guilty and in apologizing. And here I introduced them to the IKEA effect. I said, guys, we need to position this completely differently to our customers. We need to explain that actually together we are on a journey to achieve a miracle. This patient should die. We all know that. Now we're going to work super hard to try to save this patient. And it's going to be hard and it's going to be tough. But if you position it to this way, then the customers are actually have equity in this journey. They want to help. They are ready to face the difficulties. So they start to be in the mind of building the IKEA bookshelf. And very interestingly, we turn lime into lemonade because we won a customer experience award across industry with this example.
Very interesting. And especially to discover that you're what I think is often referred to as an IKEA modder, in that you're technically painting IKEA equipment makes you a modder. You're in the business of modifying IKEA equipment, and that was a dimension to you I had no idea about. But I think it is a fascinating story about how in a culture like Japan, where precision is valued so highly, working in processes where precision is near impossible is an enormous cultural challenge. But at the end of the day, keeping an eye on the ultimate outcome, which in this instance is easy to get motivated around, right? We can all get excited about the idea of extending lives or saving lives. And there's a real purpose to that work, which has to be very motivating for everyone involved. If I step back and ask you a question about the bigger picture here, we've got in every developed economy, you now have an aging population, some more pronounced than others, depending on the geography. You have innovation in medicine, largely a result of success of the pharmaceutical industry, but also in other forms of medical technology industry, meaning that we can extend life even further, meaning that we can treat patients in their older years with more and more innovative and technological solutions. All that adds up to good news for the species in the sense that we're living longer, but a cost burden. And I saw this fascinating chart, and I think it was based on the UK, which showed the sort of net economic contribution by age of the population. So as you can imagine, when it's kids, it's a negative contribution. They're consuming more than they're paying in. Then you get into the earning years, you're paying taxes. Peak earning years, you're paying more taxes. Then you sort of go into retirement and old age. And the chart just drops like a stone negatively. And as you get into your 80s and even the 90s, the degree of negativity and sort of economic contribution becomes massive. So we've got this lifetime view, and if anything, it's getting more pronounced in that the elderly are getting more economically expensive to support. And then you have an aging population. So the stress this is going to place on society and the pharma companies has to be profound. And the natural reaction from the population is often, well, let's do something to cap pharma prices. Let's find some ways to sort of fight that trend. But that's going to be a battle we're going to see for well, I mean, I'm not sure we're going to see the end of it, are we?
Oh, no, you are right. You are right. Basically, what you're raising as a question is healthcare utilization was the best way to invest on population. And of course, there are no easy answers on that. What I would say is it has to be a co-construction. So every stakeholders cannot have a selfish perspective. It has to be built around a continuous dialogue. And at the end of the day, these are societal choices. I mean, you reached the point of aging population. I think that's a fascinating topic. By the way, an interesting one as well in terms of geographies, because everybody knows the situation about Japan and Korea, but China, this is one of their biggest problems, because now they are facing the consequence of the single child policy for decades.
The Chinese have literally legislated themselves into this problem, right? The Japanese
Exactly.
and the Koreans have, it's an inevitable consequence of the nature of their society, but the Chinese have kind of self-inflicted this.
True. So when we look at aging population, there is actually, of course, a negative side about it. Clearly, past a certain age, the healthcare cost increase per patient. That's natural. But maybe we need also to have a bit of thinking as societies about, is that okay to send memos in companies when people have passed 40 years old or 45 to say you are now in the senior group, and you should try to think about the last final chapter of your career, and please register to basically a pension retirement class. The point is actually there is also the opportunity to keep people healthy, active for longer. And maybe people do not have to become a burden to society past 55. And we shouldn't actually consider that at this stage they can't generate economic value, so they are pure cost to the healthcare system. So behind all this conversation, there are really strong societal choices. And I think it's going to be the task of all governments and citizens to actually work on that together.
That's a really interesting point. Speaking from the perspective of someone who's definitely past 55, and I think I can speak for all of us here, because none of us are the right side of that number. The idea that we can be making economic contributions into our 70s, into our 80s, is surely one of the ways we get out of this fix, right? And not only because it changes the curve I described in a very favorable way, but it also probably enhances life, continues to give a sense of purpose. And I was struck with this, and you'll appreciate this as a Frenchman, with the debate in France right now over modifications to the retirement age. So you have now the French are famous, but not exclusive in their perspective on retirement. Other European countries share to some degree or another that perspective. But the French do sort of, in some ways, I hope you would agree with this, or at least not take offense at the idea that the French sort of personify this idea that retirement at a certain age is a untouchable topic because we want to spend our years beyond a certain point in leisure. And that you're suggesting that culture is going to have to change. We're going to have to rethink what it means to retire, perhaps.
Yes, and I think without going into a deeper psychoanalysis of the French society, I think that there's always this mechanism where you run towards something or you run to escape something. And I think one of the deep, I would say, reason why people are so attached to early retirement is that actually they perceive the relationship with work as negative. So people are actually thinking about work toxicity. And I don't deny that for some, we are privileged because we love what we do. And therefore, we see a very positive balance sheet in a way. And maybe for some people, they are in a very difficult work, they're in a very, very difficult situation. And it's very clear that actually when you look at life expectancy as well, people who are exposed to, I would say, less interesting job, their life expectancy, or harder job, their life expectancy is shorter. So again, I don't consider that it's crazy to say I don't want to retire at 65 if my life expectancy is 66. But if you are in the 80s, I think that, and if you want to be active, you should be given a chance. That's my point. I think currently, it's not the case.
No, and
Ageism is rampant.
It's a problem. Living as you know I do in Arizona, where there's a significant retirement community. One of the things most striking is if you go into retail in Arizona, especially to a hardware store, for example, you go into a Home Depot, it's often being populated by a relatively elderly group. And, that interaction is important for them, but they're also very knowledgeable. If you want to know somebody who's going to give you the right screwdriver, it's probably somebody in their 60s who's been doing it. So, and that's a rewarding relationship for everybody, not just the customer, but the employee and the employer. And obviously that's a very narrow view of what work looks like into your 60s. But I think that you're right. If we can create an environment where it is appealing for people to be working in their 60s and 70s and bringing their experience, then we're going to be beneficial for society overall. And of course, as I approach my 60th birthday, I become even more acute of that idea. So I think that's a very interesting take on it. We're not going to solve these problems without a rethinking about a structure of our lives. And because at the end of the day, the pharma industry will, we hope, continue to innovate and find ways to enhance the quality of those lives in old age and extend that life. That's our goal, but that runs against an economic equation.
It's even better and to a certain extent more challenging, because not only will continue to innovate, it's exploding, Richard. It's exploding. The science is unbelievable, and it's so exciting. I wish I could live 200 years to see what will happen.
We're just one compound away.
because it's mind blowing what's happening. Really, I mean, there are a lot of things that we would have considered impossible when I was a student that now are actually completely practical. So there is the possibility to innovate. It's going to be accelerated by AI in a massive way as well. So the budget questions that we are raising, budget for the payers, how we can finance the innovation, budget for the investors as well, resource allocation for developing products is going to become even more important. But I think we have now such powerful tools with AI, then also that will create massive improvement in productivity.
I know we're kind of running up against time here, but I did want to touch on that because one of the things that was most interesting during COVID was the development of vaccines using radically different approaches that were more data orientated than the traditional vaccine development. And certainly the work that Moderna did shows the practical application of data and technology now to pharmaceutical developments. And I think this sort of passed people by a little bit, but this is breakthrough, isn't it, in terms of speed and effectiveness?
It was unbelievable. It was unbelievable, actually, to be able to develop vaccines in less than 2 years, when classical development takes 5 to 10, was unbelievable. It was a combination of two things. And we're going back actually to the core of the conversation. The technology, the will to invest in the technology basically features. But the second piece it goes back to human behavior. There was a level of collaboration, of transparency, of data sharing to fit this technology that we'd never seen before. So I think globally, people realized that we were actually facing a global threat to our existence and to our economy. And it was not a time where the classical turf war, lack of trust should play, because we would all lose badly. So actually, the level of data exchange in the scientific community has been unmatched. And I think that give us, you're right, that give us a lot of insights about what we need to do for solving complex problems. The combination of trust and technology is incredibly powerful.
You know, they say that war is the biggest locomotive of change. In some ways, we were fighting a war against a virus, and it had that similar effect. Well, that's a very positive note to end on. So let's wrap it up there, because I think there's a real optimism here in terms of what can be achieved, and we've covered some pretty weighty topics from a fascinating industry. So, JC, thank you very much. I really enjoyed the conversation, and look forward to hearing more from you in the future about the future endeavors you're involved in.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the CX Iconoclast from OCX Cognition. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you won't miss any of our thought-provoking conversations. And please get in touch if you want to learn more about what OCX Cognition's predictive CX analytics platform can do for your business by providing complete insights into every account, continuously updated and connected to operations. You'll find contact info in the show notes.